Hi, and welcome to our webinar. My name is George Lamb with Nextivity, and today we're going to talk about oscillation, how it occurs naturally in a cellular environment, and how the Cel-Fi system keeps that from happening. Now, of course, I'm not going to do all this work by myself. I've drafted my buddy David Beza to come in and help out with it. So David, I think what I'll do is I'll just hang out in the background here, and when a question comes up, I might interrupt you, or I might have my own questions while we're there. But for right now, I think I'll let you just run with it. So take it away, David.
Thank you, George. My name is David Beza, and I'm a solutions architect here with Nextivity in San Diego. And what we're going to talk about today is how the Cel-Fi smart signal boosters prevent oscillation from occurring. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slide deck. So during this webinar, if you have any questions, as George mentioned, go ahead and submit those via the chat window, and then we'll field those in the flow of the webinar, as well as at the end, we'll gather all the remaining questions and answer them. So anything that kind of comes to mind or that you think about during the webinar, go ahead and submit that, and we'll get that covered. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get started. Alrighty, how Cel-Fi prevents oscillation. So what we're going to learn today in this webinar is what is oscillation. Then we will see how oscillation can affect traditional BDAs or wideband repeaters. Then we will go into how exactly does Cel-Fi prevent oscillation from occurring. And then finally, we'll look at some results in actual real-world performance of a forced oscillation condition and see how the Cel-Fi performs in that environment. Then again, we'll have question and answer sessions, and then we'll review the material that we cover in this webinar at the end. So I will go ahead and get started. So what is oscillation? The best way I can describe oscillation is in the audio environment, you have feedback or echo from a microphone. So basically, you speak into the microphone, it goes into the amplifier and then out through the speaker, but the microphone or the receiver picks up its own output, and then you get the loud screeching sound, you get into an audio oscillation or an echo condition or feedback. With traditional BDAs, we can be subject to the same thing. You can see on the example on the right, this is a traditional layout for a wideband repeater. Now, if the cellular panel or the transmitter, if the output of the system is detected by the incoming antenna, that's when you can get into an oscillation condition. So we'll go a little bit further into the wideband repeater example. So with the wideband repeater, you have a gain coming out of the indoor server antenna. That's represented by the green circle in the icon here. So the oscillation condition can occur when the server antenna is brought closer to the input or receiving antenna. So when that occurs, you bring the antenna closer. Now the output of the system is detected by the input, and that creates echo and this oscillation environment. So regulatory bodies for wideband repeaters, they require that a repeater detect and correct an oscillation condition. Now, how do traditional wideband repeaters do this? In one example, they can reduce their gain by 10 to 15 dB, which essentially shrinks their coverage bubble. But as you can see, the receiving antenna can no longer pick up the output of the repeater. So that does, correct the oscillation condition that occurred. Now, if there's a fluctuation in the received signal, it can cause the oscillation event to recur. And if there are repeated oscillation conditions, the repeater actually has to shut off. So they're mandated to discontinue transmission if there's repeated events to, protect the network and protect any harm that might be done. So that's a little bit of the background of oscillation in a wideband repeater environment. So now we're going to talk about the Cel-Fi approach and how we actually prevent oscillation. So although it's very good to detect and correct from the conditions occurring, we go a little bit further and we prevent the oscillation condition. So in the middle here we have our legacy Pro two-box solution. So on the left, we have the network unit or the window unit that receives the signal from the macro network. And then we have the coverage unit, which provides cellular service in the area where the end user is located. So what we do is the network unit, we receive the cellular signal over the air. We decode all of the broadcast messages so we can determine what the transmit power was from the base station, and then we can measure the path loss at the network unit location. And with those two numbers, we can determine what our maximum gain can be to maintain network safety. So we have that maximum gain setting. Now the Cel-Fi system will use the path loss between the network unit and the coverage unit to determine what the optimal system gain is for our environment. So we have our max gain setting that can be reflected by the larger circle. And then with our automatic gain control, we can reduce the coverage bubble to the necessary environment. So one thing I want to note is on the left there, the network unit, you can see that we are still receiving a little bit of the signal from the coverage unit. We also have a positive echo margin that allows our echo canceller to receive signal from both the macro network and our own coverage unit, cancel out the echo and prevent oscillation from occurring. Also provides a larger coverage bubble for the end user.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understood that, David. What you're saying is that if the maximum allowable gain that we detected in the first step actually is great enough, we could actually have a coverage bubble that extends beyond where the network unit is, and the echo canceller actually picks up and cancels that signal out so we can have a bigger bubble. But I think you also said that if we get to the situation where the echo canceller gets a little bit threatened, that we could reduce the gain and shrink the size of the bubble. Now, how often does this happen?
Oh, that's a good question. So with our chipset and our algorithm, it's actually a fast attack real-time algorithm. So it's constantly measuring on a millisecond basis what the received signal is from the network, what the system gain is, and what the echo level that's received. So it's constantly actually monitoring and making these measurements, and then basically reacting or making the necessary adjustments. So yeah, good question, good point, George, that you brought up. So again, we are able with our echo canceller and our positive echo margin to have a coverage bubble that extends from our coverage unit to the network unit and a little bit beyond, so that again, we create a large coverage bubble. But again, on the left, the network unit is receiving its own signal, but with our echo canceller, we're able to prevent oscillation, and then we make real-time adjustments to maintain that safety. So as we mentioned, you know, with the wideband repeater, they might make an arbitrary 10 to 15 dB back off when oscillation occurs. The Cel-Fi smart signal booster is making real-time adjustments and auto-configuring in real time. So just wanted to kind of highlight what...
But let me just ask you about that. You said 10 to 15 dB for them, and you said that we could get, what did you say, probably about a 5 dB positive gain margin. So the maximum difference between the two might be 20 dB. That doesn't sound like a very big deal on a 100 dB system.
It might not sound like a lot. Yeah, you've got 100 dB and you only go back 20. But within a cellular environment, because it's logarithmic and some other factors, that 20 dB difference is quite significant. So on this slide, we have a fixed input signal. And so we're going to look at the different gain levels and how that affects a coverage bubble inside of a building. So we have an off-air signal, neg 90, strongest signal in the building. You're by the window, so that's where we put our network unit. Then we stretch our coverage unit, or you place the server antenna for a wideband repeater into the coverage area. Now with 60 dB of gain, you can see it's going to provide a neg 30 boost of power, enough to cover a small desk. So if you have the coverage unit on your desk and you need to make calls, have reliable service, we can do that in a small radius with a 60 dB gain at the neg 90 input level. Now with an additional 10 dB of gain, we're able to increase that circle. So you can see that not only has the user who has the coverage unit at his desk improved his signal, but he's able to improve the coverage of those around him. So in his immediate surrounding area, maybe in an adjacent room, something to that nature. Now, by adding 30 dB of gain to that 70 with 100 dB of gain in this same small space, we're able to cover the entire floor space. So for this small business or medium enterprise location, one single booster with 100 dB of gain is significantly better than something that is 20 or 30 dB less. So this just kind of gives you a graphic visual of how that gain increase can improve the coverage in an indoor environment. So yeah, thanks again, George, for pointing that out. So again, with the Cel-Fi Smart Signal Booster, we can have 5 dB of extra gain beyond the coverage unit. So our echo canceller is able to detect the macro network, detect our boosted signal, make a comparison, cancel them out, and keep the system gain at a safe level. Whereas a traditional wideband repeater might make an arbitrary back off and you know, they might extremely go in the wrong direction, shrink the coverage bubble for safety reasons, which is good, but you might not have the coverage in the necessary areas. So I'm going to look at a scenario where we attempted to force an oscillation condition by bringing our receiver and transmitter extremely close together. So basically attempting to induce a oscillation condition. For this example, we will use the Pro, the 2-box solution against our legacy flagship product. In the icon on the right, we can see that as the coverage unit is separated further away from the network unit, the coverage bubble gets larger. So the more isolation, the more gain you have. So we'll start off with an ideal scenario where you're at max transmit power, good separation, the echo is real small, and then we'll force the oscillation condition where we bring them extremely close and we can see the Cel-Fi echo cancellation algorithm in action, as well as the gain control in action. So again, large environment, we've got good separation. This is utilizing our Wave application. This is a Bluetooth application that can connect to our smart boosters via Bluetooth, and it has an application for your smart device, tablet or handset, and you can actually view not only the radio parameters of your cellular environment, but also the performance of the booster itself. So on the left there, we are synchronized to this booster. We can see our incoming network signal strength is good, so we have a nice strong signal coming in. And then we see our boost level is at a 9, and our meter is all the way to the right. So we've got good, strong boost, good, strong gain. So on the middle column, we can see our radio parameters. So for this particular example, we were on a 10 megahertz LTE channel on the 1900 megahertz band, that's band 2. We have all of our PCI information. We also have the donor received signal information. So we can see our RSSI is at -70. We have a good SINAR, so they should have a good strong LTE service. So I just want to point out on that middle column, the downlink power is at 11 dB. So for a 10 megahertz channel, we're approaching the max transmit level. And we also see our uplink safe mode gain is 86 dB. So the calculation I showed you earlier, where we take the transmit power and the path loss and we determine the maximum gain, that's what that number is. And then on the right, this is the output of the system. So we can see that our downlink gain is 81 dB. So earlier we mentioned our 5 dB of echo margin. So the difference between the downlink system gain at 81 and our maximum possible gain of 86 dB shows that if we were to stretch it further, we could still get maybe an additional 5 dB of gain from the transmitter. And then we notice our downlink echo is at 0 dB. So we haven't reached our echo limit. So that's why we're able to transmit at such a strong power level, because we haven't impacted any of those echo margin thresholds.
And so the reason we didn't go to a positive echo was because we were maxed out on power. Is that what you're saying?
We had good isolation, good separation. So even though he was at max power, it wasn't enough to overdrive that echo canceller or tick that echo margin into the positive. So it stays at 0, but we have another 5 dB to play with if we were to increase the gain. But at that current transmit power level, you know, we have good isolation, I think is basically what this is telling us. Again, so we're going to bring these extremely close together. So we're going to force what would normally cause oscillation. Now, when we do that, again, the signal strength, the incoming signal strength is nice and strong, but we see that our boost level has reduced to a 1. So, you know, the wave application, again, is very, very intuitive. So the first thing we notice between the boost number is the color of the graph above it. So red being good, green being good, red being bad. So this shows that with a gain reduction of 1, we're not getting the maximum boost that we could from the system. However, it's still working. This is not an alarm condition. We haven't shut off, and the system is not oscillating. So to further share that with you, so we can see our downlink transmit power. Previously, it was plus 11. Now the transmit power is minus 11. So we were at plus 11 with maximum separation and isolation. Now, when we bring those closer together, the coverage unit doesn't have to talk as loud to get its signal back to the network unit. So we've reduced the transmit power, but there's still a coverage bubble around the coverage unit. Our uplink safe mode gain is still at 86 dB. So we didn't change the location of the network unit. He's in the same good, strong signal area by the window typically. So we didn't move him. All we did was move the coverage unit closer. Now, when we move that coverage unit closer, on the right, you can see the effects of both of our algorithms at work here. So we can see that the automatic gain control has reduced the gain from 81 dB down to 59 dB. So we can see a gain reduction. Also, our downlink echo gain. So when we had good separation, he was at max transmit power. He was only being detected at a 0 dB level. Now when we bring him closer, his coverage bubble is extending beyond the network unit by 4 dB. So this is a good example of the coverage unit is transmitting. The transmission of the Cel-Fi boosted signal is traveling beyond that network unit, and the network unit is able to receive both the macro signal, its own boosted signal, and cancel out the difference in the echo. So we have a positive echo number of 4 dB. So this is a good example of, in a scenario where a traditional wideband repeater would have gone to an oscillation state and made a drastic reduction, or possibly triggered multiple events and shut off, which is another thing that could negatively impact your user, the Cel-Fi system is able to continue to boost. We made the necessary adjustments, but the coverage unit is still providing a boosted cellular signal. And this is what we want. It's hands off to the user. They don't have to audit the system, periodically check it. There's nothing to maintain. The system will self-organize, self-adjust, and maintain network safety and a good end user experience. Okay, so I kind of talked at a high level. Now we'll dig a little bit deeper into exactly how Cel-Fi does it and what the difference is. So I've mentioned the terms, but this basically shows you what's behind the brains of our product, and that is our 3rd generation Nextivity IntelliBoost 6-core processor. Now this processor is present in all of our boosters. So all of our smart boosters have this technology that allows oscillation to be prevented in the most severe conditions. The way we
just to be sure, it doesn't have to be a network unit and a coverage unit. It could be 2 antennas on a Go. It could be the 2 components of a Prime. It could be the network unit, a coverage unit on a Quattro. It all works the same way?
Yes, that's correct, George. That's correct. So I use the 2-box Pro and Duo solution as an example. But again, our worldwide product family, as you mentioned, we have the Go that uses external antennas. So again, with the Go, the oscillation conditions are with the donor or receiving antenna, and then the server or the transmitting antenna. So the same algorithm applies with the normal RF antennas. With the Prime solution, same thing with the transmitter and power adapter and the panel antenna, even if they are extremely close because of limited space, we will still make the same adjustments. We will still cancel the echo and provide the same coverage bubble required to maintain the integrity of our product, which is to provide a boosted cellular signal indoors where the customer otherwise wouldn't. And with with Quattro, same thing. So with Quattro, we can go off air. And the coverage units, you're going to have multiple coverage units in the enterprise space for Quattro. And same thing, we're going to make the same adjustments with respect to the gain control and the echo cancellation across all the Cel-Fi product lines. And so again, we've got the advanced multi-tap echo cancellation that helps to prevent oscillation. And then the automatic gain control, it helps the system to self-organize and self-configure and maintain a strong boost in even the most severe conditions. And all while delivering up to an industry-leading 100 dB of gain, which we showed earlier can increase the coverage footprint of a booster. So with maximum gain and with intelligent technology, we're able to prevent oscillation from occurring that can negatively impact not only the network, but the user experience. Okay, so that is the presentation on how Cel-Fi prevents oscillation. If there's any questions from the field, we can go ahead and field them now.
David, I don't see any questions so far, but while we're waiting, I did want to let everybody know we have a couple more webinars that are coming up. We've got a webinar on what is Cat-M and narrowband IoT, and can we boost Cat-M and narrowband IoT? That's going to be hosted by Wayne Cat from our Singapore office on Tuesday, April 3rd at 8 o'clock in the morning PST, and Thursday, April 5th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we've got another one on the traditional repeater problem of unequal coverage per operator and how Cel-Fi solves that issue. Steve Van Skyke's going to be running that session on Tuesday, April 24th at 8 o'clock in the morning PST, and on Wednesday, April 25th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon PST. I also wanted to point out that for all of our webinars, anyone that you might have missed, you can go to our website, www.celfi.com/webinars. And from there, you can view on demand any of the previous webinars that you may have missed. So they're all available for on-demand viewing at celfi.com/webinars. And David, I have to assume that you did a fantastic job because there are no questions from the audience.
Well, thank you, George. Appreciate that. Well, again, if there are any questions, we'll have some follow-up. Let me grab this here. Okay, so let's review what we talked about today. So first, we talked about what is oscillation. Oscillation is feedback or echo from the transmission of a system back into its own receiver. We used the microphone feedback with the speaker as an example, and then we did a little bit more deep diving into oscillation events in a traditional wideband repeater. How does Cel-Fi prevent oscillation? So we covered in detail and with a real world example how the Cel-Fi smart signal boosters are able to prevent oscillation from the advanced multi-tap echo canceller and automatic gain control algorithms that are embedded into the Nextivity products. And then we looked at, again, the results and performance of forcing an oscillation condition by bringing the transmitter extremely close to the receiver, and we saw that the system was able to self-organize, self-maintain, and to continue to boost without triggering an oscillation event or shutting off. And the questions and review was very simple. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is support@cel-fi.com. You can also visit our website. We have tons of information. We have product spec downloads. We have videos, frequently asked questions, things of that nature. And also feel free to email George or myself directly. You can see our email addresses there on the screen. Again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time and learning how the Cel-Fi smart signal boosters can prevent oscillation in a cellular environment.
Okay, thanks, David. There are no questions, so I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. This webinar, like all the rest of them, will be available at cel-fi.com/webinars. Appreciate you coming. Bye-bye.